So anatomy is a successful employer brand. Essentially, this is the first time that we're sharing this research, so really keen to get some feedback from you post in the breaks or whenever you have the opportunity. And there's kind of three key points, really. It's all of this that you see here in the title, but it's as told by UK workers. We'll expand upon that a bit more in a short while. So we'll share with you the questions that we asked UK workers, and we'll share with you their answers, and also what that means for us as organisations too. So it's always good to start off with a bit of an icebreaker quote that kind of appeals to the theme of the day. This is a quote from Jeff Bezos from Amazon. It's, "Your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room." Now, of course, when he first said this, it was more regarding what they viewed as their consumer brand. But what's really interesting is that when we've produced research for these events and speaking to you all, there's a really close link now between the recruitment process, both in terms of taking on application, that's closely linked with customer service and what we're producing for our target audience. And the two things are not too dissimilar. So what I might suggest to you guys is that actually your brand, in this instance, although you meant the consumer brand, we might also presume that the same is applicable to our employer brands too. This is an interesting slide because it serves a kind of multi-purpose for us. The first is to highlight the kind of two levels of employer brand, and they've already been spoken about this morning. But the first that you see on the top there is how we can use employer brand as a form of candidate attraction. And as the UK's most recognised recruiter brand, that's certainly what we're going to be talking about a lot of in our presentation. But it's really important to keep that employee productivity section, the one below that first bit, because that's more speaking towards retaining and engaging the staff that currently work for you. And it also serves the purpose of looking quite dry and boring, which makes the rest of my slides look really nice, so that's good. Let's crack on with the research. So this is hot off the press for us. We ran this research at the start of the month. So it's 2,000 UK workers of all sizes, all ages, all locations, all demographics, and all levels in terms of where they're at in their careers. And there's two key areas that we wanted to touch upon. One is who UK workers most want to work for. So who do people view as the dream employers? But what's more important to us and what's really interesting is why they've selected these brands. Whenever we've talked about who previously, we've used it as a very loose bit of fun that we've produced at the end of our presentations, because it's really interesting. It kickstarts conversation. It creates a bit of debate in terms of why we think these brands are number one. But the why is what's going to give us the takeaways from today and what we can then take back to our offices and implement perhaps for our own employer brands. So we'll start off with the first question that we asked our audience, and that is, if you could work for any organisation, who would you love to work for? And it's at this time that I'd encourage you to have a little moment, think to yourself, maybe jot down the top 5 that you think and you have in mind. What's really interesting for us is that this has changed over the past 2-3 years, and it also starts to change when you take into account the different age groups that you capture as well. So we've got a little bit for you on that too. And as I said, what we've done previously is put this at the bookend of our presentation, just as a nice little send-off. So what we've done this time is move it to the front, and hopefully it will become clear as to why. So hopefully you've had a few moments to jot down those brands that you think will appear in the top 5. Let's reveal. Number 5, Amazon. Just by show of hands, who had Amazon or who thought Amazon? Excellent. You might have seen the spoiler that we put right at the top of the presentation there. This is Amazon's first time in the top 5 over the past 3 years that we've run this research, again with various different groups too. That's quite interesting to us. Who had Virgin down? Excellent. Number 4 for Virgin. Virgin has been an ever-present, but what's really interesting is they've slowly fallen down that kind of top 5 list. And I don't think that's because of anything that they're particularly doing wrong. I think it's more to do with the brands that have usurped them, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that is shortly. Microsoft at number 3. Who had Microsoft? Okay, a few people, interesting. Google at number 2. And that's really interesting with Google because Google have actually dropped down from when we ran this at the start of the year. Number 1, I'm sure you all had it, Apple. Who had Apple? Just by show of hands. Excellent. Any brands that aren't in there that you thought might have been in there? Just feel free to call them out. Innocent, interesting. We do have Innocent in our presentation, but yeah, you're quite right, and they have been present in previous top 5s, not on this occasion. Any more for any more? Say again, sorry? Facebook. Yeah, Facebook is a real notable absentee, not only in our top 5, but in our top 10. We don't know as to why, but they've been in the news for various different reasons recently. That might very well have influenced their standing in that top 5. What's really interesting is the other brands that maybe haven't featured this time out. So Waitrose, BBC and NHS, these big British institutions have been ever present previously. Not on this occasion. BBC are featured in the top 10, with Waitrose and NHS just drifting outside of that top 5. And Lush and ASOS have been really popular amongst a younger audience. So they poll really well with that 16 to 24-year-old age bracket. And again, that's not surprising when you consider with Lush, they've had quite a few edgy campaigns, and they've again been in the news recently. Lush also have what would you call it? It's a policy whereby at board level, they'll go into the shop floors once a month and work with the staff and speak to the customers. I think that's really helped get them over the line as a kind of a destination brand, as somebody that works from the top down to floor level. And ASOS have got that, well, they're ever used, right? I mean, it's a company that younger audience is always engaging with. So, while I play you this video, there's a couple of really interesting points that we felt about our top 5 that we're sharing with you. This is a video of Apple, and I put this on in the background just while I go over these points, so we can try and figure out why anyone would possibly want to work for such an organisation, right? Well, the key thing with the top 5 is that big US tech firms dominate that top 5. And I think a lot of that is in part due to their brand ubiquity. Who amongst us hasn't got an iPhone, hasn't used Google, hasn't used a service like Amazon? We all use them regularly. And I think it speaks directly to how they've influenced our daily lives and how they've made our lives easier. What these brands have also done, or where they originate from, is that kind of startup entrepreneurial spirit. And what's really interesting is, despite the fact that they're now multi-million-pound organisations with a huge amount of staff, they've still retained that same kind of that feeling of being that startup, being exciting, being innovative, and being engaging. What's really interesting is that we don't all want to work for these brands, right? I mean, not all of us in this room do, and certainly not all of the people that we surveyed do. But what they have done is established a new set of norms about what we expect from workplace culture that perhaps is dramatically different to how it was, say, 5, 10 years ago. So how can we generate excitement with our messaging? Well, we can understand the messaging that candidates want to hear and really scratch beneath the surface of this top 5. So it's a really interesting thing for me to stand up here and say to you, the top 5 is interesting, but actually there's more to it than that, and almost kind of dismiss the top 5 entirely based upon the kind of actionable takeaways when you drill down a little bit more into detail. So let's go into that research now. The first question we asked, really important and really crucial, is why did you select that organisation as number 1? And the first reason they gave, the most popular reason, is that it's a brand that they'd be proud to work for, which is a really emotive reasoning when we think about it. So if you think about those big top 5 US tech firms, they've cultivated an audience that are fanatical about their products. So how do you articulate the pride of working for your brand? And I think Sarah touched upon it this morning brilliantly as part of the SMRS presentation. It's all about the purpose of which people are joining your brand. If I think about read.co.uk and what my purpose is in terms of what we offer to our audience, we're helping individuals find a job, and that's hugely important, it's hugely vital, and it fuels me with that sense of purpose. And if you think about Nationwide, I believe they're talking later on, the community bank, they're helping fund people's mortgages, help give them the money that they need to fuel their interests outside of the workplace too. So if there's one kind of actionable point that we can take away from that piece of insight, it's that find a way to articulate the pride of working for your organisation. And that could be pride, it could be values, it could be purpose. But it's well worth taking a little bit of time with yourself and your teams to understand what that truly is. And that might very well be communicating the ways that you make a difference to your customers, to your users, whatever you choose to call them. We asked a little bit more. We wanted to drill a little bit further into that idea of pride. So 46% of our audience told us they'd be more likely to work for a brand they use regularly. 45% said they would be more likely to work for a brand they've had a personal experience with. And again, I've already touched upon this idea of viewing the recruitment process as a customer service. And certainly, we're not all unfamiliar with the idea that producing an excellent customer service is only going to benefit your ability to attract a wider audience. What's really interesting is that top point there in terms of if people are using your brand regularly, again, thinking about that ubiquity, they're going to consider you as an employer destination. So again, if there's an actionable takeaway from this, it might very well be to speak with your marketing teams and understand how you might want to and how you might choose to re-engage or to engage even with returning customers, because they might very well be hidden talent pools that you'd not previously considered. And there might be a way that you can align CRM with returning customers to potentially work for your brand. Just a thought. Number 2, in terms of the top reasons why people pick their employers of choice, a reputation for success. Now, this is really interesting because it's kind of twofold. It does speak to a kind of an emotive response in that there's an amount of self-esteem that's associated with that, as we would all want to view ourselves as successful, and if we can contribute to the success of the organisation, we'll feel much more positive about ourselves and the nature of the work that we do. But it also speaks to that job security, and that is a theme that will be reoccurring throughout the presentation, in that if you work for a successful organisation, you're only going to be there for a longer time because they are successful, they're generating revenue, they're a popular product, they're a popular service, so you have that element of security. Number 3, offers generous pay and benefits. And I think that speaks directly to how we want to be recompensed for our hard work, our time, and our skill set, essentially. What's really interesting is that pay and benefits, wanting to be valued, fund lifestyles is really important for Gen Z, so that's 18 to 24-year-olds. And for millennials, if you consider the responsibilities that we're now coming into in terms of either becoming homeowners or wanting to start families, that's where pay is going to become really important and really vital. So a real interesting mix there of kind of heart and head in those top 3 in terms of emotive reasons, wanting to feel pride for the brand that you're associated with, that you work for, and also wanting to make sure that you have the wage that will be able to fuel your interests outside of work too. To round out that top 5, we have a market-leading brand and a brand that's known for a fun social environment. And again, those are 2 quite interesting points, so we wanted to pick upon them in a little bit more detail. So first we'll talk about is a market-leading brand, and we've talked about the ubiquity that top 5 big US tech firms have. What we really want to understand from our audience is it important for you to work for a recognised brand? Because some of us don't have that luxury of being ubiquitous. 28% of our audience said it was very important to them. 38% said somewhat, and 26% said not very. What's really interesting is for those that said it was very important, it indexed really highly amongst millennials. So millennials are the most brand-driven amongst any of the age demographics. 88% of 25 to 34-year-olds suggested that it was very important to them. So that's 3 times that mean response that you see there in that 28. But what's really important, as you can see, is it's not the kind of the weight of opinion and the weight of the response that we've got. It's by no means the be-all and end-all to have a recognised employer brand. People are much more willing to kind of open their horizons to the right opportunity rather than one that they recognise and a brand that they necessarily recall. So what is the key benefit to having a recognisable brand? And is there a way that if our brand isn't recognisable, what's the kind of key thing that we should be expanding upon in our employer brand and our communications? Well, the main benefit is job security, and that's what our audience told us. If you work for a well-known organisation, offers you that sense of security. So if there's one takeaway, it's to incorporate the sense of security, to incorporate your successes as a business into your communications, whether it be at job ad level or much wider thinking. Because it speaks to the provenance of your brand, it speaks about your business performance. And I think previously we might have assumed that a lot of that is kind of patting yourself on the back or self-grandizing, but actually there is a really important piece in there that it speaks directly to how successful your organisation is and how confident an individual stepping into your organisation is going to be. So that is our action point to take away from there, to share your successes, share your business performance if you've performed really well year on year, however you see to measure it, and forget any of those barriers that you might have, any kind of sense of, oh, it's a bit cringe to talk about how successful we've been. Forget it, because it actually speaks directly to job security that candidates, UK workers, really want to feel when applying to jobs for your brand. So not all of us work in brands that have been around for a long time. So what was really interesting to ask our audience is, how do you feel about working for startups or fast-growing organisations? And would you in fact prefer to work for an organisation of that ilk? Because as we've previously discussed, it's one of the key facets to those big US tech firms. They've managed to retain that sense of entrepreneurial startup despite being big organisations. And breathe. So 1 in 4 people suggested they would actually prefer to work for a startup. So don't let the fact that if you are a new business or you're fast growing, don't let that deter you if you don't feel that you have that recognisable brand just yet, because a quarter of our audience wants to work for you. What's really interesting when we delved a little bit more into detail is that 1 in 5 people hadn't previously considered it, but are open to it. So by no means is it going to be impossible for you to find individuals that want to actively work for a startup or for a fast-growing organisation. We also wanted to ask individuals what were the kind of key themes and the key threads that came from working for a startup or working as part of a startup culture. And these are kind of the key buzzwords that were positive associations. And that's the work was challenging, it was rewarding, high risk, there was opportunity for faster skills development, and finally, there was an opportunity to take on greater responsibility. So we have an action, and I promise you these bubbles won't keep coming up because they're irritating me, I don't know about you guys. But it's about embracing that challenging aspect of working for a startup as part of your comms. Because 88% of all of our respondents said that for them to feel successful and for them to feel engaged at work, they want to feel challenged. So as a startup, that might form a key part of your communications. 41% said that it was vital for them feeling successful, happy and engaged at work, that feeling of being challenged. So if it is challenging work, don't skirt around it, embrace it as part of your communications and as part of your employer brand. And also enhance the perks of working in a dynamic environment, whether that's an opportunity to learn certain skills faster or to take on greater responsibility at an early stage. And I would have thought that this is something that if you're able to say that, we're already saying, but a really keen thread to highlight here. So going back to our top 5, the final area that we want to kind of bring out in a little bit more detail is this idea that people want to work in a fun, social environment. So this ties in very nicely with a question we asked around workplace culture. So what workplace culture do people most want to work in? And again, it came out as fun and sociable. People want to work in a fun, sociable workplace. So I'm just going to play you a video, and we talked about Innocent perhaps being in our top 10 as they have been previously. This is a video that Innocent have created. I'm just going to talk over the top of it because I wanted to kind of bring out this point of fun means something different to all of us in this room, and that's what makes it such a difficult and challenging area to produce insights around. In some instances, fun might very well be AstroTurf in the office or on a van outside. It perhaps is for Innocent. I don't mean to sound cynical, but that is a big attraction. That's one way Innocent choose to articulate their brand as fun and interesting. But we asked our 2,000 respondents, what are the key practical takeaways? What are the key things that organisations can implement that will make them come across as a fun, sociable environment for you to work in? So in order of preference or in order of most popular, after-work socials, and again, that's something that won't be completely eye-opening to the majority of you here. What's really interesting is volunteering and charity days comes in a second, and we always talk about CSR being a vital part of our employer branding. Well, actually, it's a vital part of making people feel engaged and feel that your brand is somewhere that's fun and sociable to work for. Work-related learning was a really interesting one for us, and one I don't think we were anticipating to see in a top 5, let alone as third on that list. What they meant by that was opportunities to share industry news and things that people are working on and understand what the person next to you on another bank of desks is currently working on and the challenges that they face and the outcomes that they find as part of their work. So just getting people to talk to each other, even about what they're doing at work, is making a really big impact to your brand being perceived as a fun and sociable place to work. And then finally, if you're able to, creative classes and workshops, something a little bit different from the norm, something a little bit quirky. And it might very well be asking your employees what they do, what their hobbies, what their interests are, and if they want to share with the group of the rest of the group, it might very well give opportunities for people to express themselves and introduce people to something a little bit different than they would have otherwise thought. And again, it certainly goes into how UK workers define a fun and sociable workplace. The other key elements to a fun, sociable workplace, independent working was very close alongside collaborative working. So whilst it might seem like these 2 points are at loggerheads with each other, I think what it speaks more to is that we need to be offering our employees that balance. The ability for independent working isn't necessarily a quiet workspace or somewhere that they can shut off. It's essentially allowing employees to feel like they're owning their work and owning their day-to-day and owning their responsibilities, and that it's not just a case of leadership micromanaging. And then collaborative working just speaks to how the individuals in your organisation can help them achieve their goals and help achieve the business goals. And I think we've already talked about how sharing is caring. Oh, I hate myself for saying that, but clearly it will make a really big impact. So independent working, collaborative working, they're not at loggerheads with each other. It's how do you get that balance between the two? So to round out that top 5, motivational leaders, and what was really interesting in the first presentation that we had from Sarah, she talked about, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but using that individual as a spokesperson for your brand. So we asked a little bit about leadership. The preferred leadership style among employed adults is friendly, approachable, leaders that are supporting of developing the workforce and are more focused on the people that work for the organisation than at the projects at hand. So again, it's that removal of micromanaging and more focused on, I don't know, company culture. If you've got a spokesperson in your brand or in your organisation that are able to do that, then that's fantastic, and certainly that's the example that was given to us this morning. What we found that was really interesting is that leaders that show honesty, integrity, clear direction, and again, avoid micromanaging are more, those elements are deemed more important than an individual who is a confident speaker. Because I think often with the brands that we've used in our top 5, Virgin, who are still there, and perhaps a Tesla who have Elon Musk, these great public speakers and very engaging to listen to, you assume that that is what you expect from all leaders. Well, actually, no, that's not what UK workers expect. And being a confident, clear speaker, again, is not the be-all and end-all. If you have that facility, great, but it's more important to be approachable, friendly, and people-focused in your leadership roles. So that's something to take away there. The final kind of piece that we wanted to talk around, and we talked about it right at the top of the presentation, is how employer brand has an impact on feeling happy and engaged at work. So we asked individuals, are you currently engaged at happy work regardless of employer brand? 64% said yes, which I think is a pretty positive score. 26% told us no, but they're not actively looking for work at the moment. And 10% said no, they're not happy and are actively looking for new opportunities. Now, what's really interesting when you drill into that 10% of individuals that are currently looking, 74% feel that their employer is not effective in communicating their EVP. So I guess we talked about at the top of the presentation about having that sense of purpose and having that kind of, you've heard there's a lot about collaborative working and working towards a team goal. Perhaps employer brand and articulating that gives you the opportunity to make people bought into a goal. And if there's that lack of a goal, a lack of purpose, then that can lead to people being disengaged in the workplace. So what does effective communication of employer brand look like? The two most popular answers to this were quarterly communications, whatever that might look like in terms of newsletters, big group debriefings, what have you. But annual review, an annual review to check in on your employer brand to make sure it aligns with your purposes, your goals, and the message that ultimately you want to be leaving with your target audience is what an employer, a UK worker, would presume of any employer brand. So we're into the summary slide now, which is good news for those of you that are edging towards lunch. American tech giants dominate our top 5. They have that association with being entrepreneurial and having that startup spirit, and they've set a new set of norms of employee or of workplace culture and what we expect from our employer brands. But brand recognition is not essential for attraction and bringing people into your organisation. Having contemporary, sincere messaging is key, and the message that we had from Sarah this morning around make sure you do you speaks directly to that. Share your organisational successes, because talent wants to work for high achievers. There's more security in working for a brand that is doing really well for itself, because job security ultimately is a theme that kept coming up from this survey that we got from our UK workers. And finally, just to bear in mind that a lack of EVP or a lack of employer brand can lead to disengaged talent. So regularly reviewed and communicated employer brands can help provide purpose for individuals in the workplace. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you all very much.